The views expressed here are those of the authors and do not in any way represent the views of Sophia TV.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Ladies First. I'm joined here by my wonderful panellists, Fahmida, Sumaya, Nishat and myself. We're just going to jump straight in, ladies. My question to you, ladies, is should sex education be mandatory in schools? And should this be something that parents have control over, because there is now legislation for children to be taught about their private parts and sex education as young as 4? How do we feel about that?
We need to look at reasons why schools teach sex education. And it's not just sex education, it's sex and relationships. So the reasons why schools started this, some of them are that children need to know about relationships. So when they're that young, they learn about relationships with friends and bullying and stuff. As they grow older and they learn about sex, they have to, they need to know about what consent age is, to also...
At 4?
No, but then it's always age appropriate. They don't teach about, contraception or things like that at the age of 4. It is all age appropriate. So
what they're, I just want to clarify, what they're are stating that they want to do is for younger children using terminology about their private parts, and I think it's for child's protection issues, because as you know, there are some parents who refer to our private parts in not scientific terms, but use pet names and
exactly.
And schools are trying to educate children just on safety and what the correct terminology is. So do we feel comfortable with that?
I personally don't. I think it should be a choice, and I think the parents should be given a choice if they want their children or child to go to a sex education class. You're talking about the age of consent. Islamically, the consent is after the consent for having an adult relationship is after the nikah, depending on what kind of nikah. We have 2 types in Shia Islam. So I think it would create a huge amount of conflict within that child that, oh, okay, so I'm living in this secular Western society, but I go home to this Muslim household, but I've just been taught these things, but but a lot of it doesn't apply to me, but I have all this
knowledge is not always wrong. There's knowledge that you get from school which might not necessarily match what you're taught at home, but then it's also the parental responsibility to then teach the children the spiritual side of it, the Islamic side of it.
Now, if you were living in such a sexualized society, and where our children have been exposed by all these sexual behaviors and advertisements and images, and they have access to internet which is not filtered
live as well on trains and stuff. You go on on the streets, people are doing things with each other. And
let's face it, sex is ubiquitous. It's everywhere you go. It's constantly in your face. I think this is terrible.
I think to prevent this, we can start with educating our kids in order to prevent such sexual behavior and attitudes towards, try and explain them about gender respect. I think there's no harm.
Let's just go back to what schools were trying to do with 4 to 5-year-olds. It's using terminology that everybody knows, so you don't give them a nickname that you are not referred to. It's telling you that areas are private, and when it's not okay to do things at a child-friendly level. So they're using teddy bears, they're telling you situations where it is appropriate for somebody to examine you and when it isn't, and when you should feel uncomfortable and uncomfortable.
Parent, I think you would appreciate.
That's a positive thing.
Yeah, you would absolutely appreciate somebody teaching your child that,
I understand about why the schools are doing this, because it creates a uniformity across the country. All these 4 to 5-year-olds are being taught the same terminology in schools up and down the country. Right, so it makes it easier to create policies and procedures, especially child protection policies and procedures. Okay, fine. But shouldn't the parent be teaching the children boundaries?
I feel the parents can take their power back if they get to the children before the school does. So if you gain your children trust and you tell them about what they'll be taught at school, so they won't be, it wouldn't come as a surprise. Or if other students or other classmates, would come and talk about something you don't know, you feel alienated, you feel like,
And the children,
was I not responsible enough to be trusted enough to actually be taught that?
The children have to be receptive to that knowledge that the parents are parting. For some children, and I've had discussions with my students, majority of them felt that they felt awkward if their parents came up to them and started talking to them about it. Majority of them agreed that they would rather be taught about this at school than by their parents.
Then you're talking about something else, Dan. That's the generation gap and the cultural.
But why would they feel awkward? Wouldn't it? As
I
I've
say
stated
that
before.
respect boundary maybe, or the
But this is a
authority
natural
boundary.
thing. This is a natural thing. I think.
remember growing up, and anything related to this was just shoved under the carpet.
In some cultures it still is.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. I think with my own situation, I can only speak about myself, is when I decided to have a child, I decided that any information was going to come from me first. So as a parent, it was my responsibility to educate myself. If there was anything I was uncomfortable with, well, tough luck, because my child would learn it from somewhere else and it might not be the correct information. So the first person, and we know ourselves, we don't go and tell our parents everything, but I feel that if you break down barriers and it's comfortable and it's normal, the human body is something normal. You know, we have to respect it. We have to know how it functions. And I think knowledge is power. You don't have to go in and tell the child everything, just age appropriate stuff.
Exactly.
But because parents aren't doing this, the state has to.
I feel the idea is to help the kids, not to encourage them to involve themselves in sexual activity or give that knowledge.
But that's the perception.
Yeah, it makes the students more curious and somehow want to explore more, and the way they do it is not taught to them, and they might then be led into things that are not morally right.
But hold on, 4 or 5 year olds don't know about morally right. Morally right comes from, I would hope, the parents, etc. What we're talking about here is safety, and let's not pretend that abuse doesn't happen in situations where we know the perpetrator. And children in this generation, I wasn't taught about FGM. This is a new thing to me.
Of course.
They're exposed to young children, their friends.
But there wasn't awareness at the time about FGM.
No, but when you have a friend who's gone away to a certain country for a long time and tells you, oh, here hurts, and this has happened to me, children compare themselves.
Yes.
They are now educating children to say, no, that's not okay. It's not okay to feel uncomfortable or hurt. And this is something that I never knew about it, but we're dealing with different issues. And I think sometimes as Muslims or any other community, we don't like change. This is an uncomfortable situation, and we'd rather be like, well, it's un-Islamic to talk about it, or, let children be children. What are your thoughts?
Schools usually give the curriculum or what they're going to be teaching, that information that's given to the parents, and then the parents, if they want more information, can request that. And if they feel that they want to withdraw their children from that education, the school is very happy to discuss it with them.
I feel sexually abused children, even if they're, as research says, 1 in 20 child being, their chances of him being abused, I think that is still a huge number, and we need to, in order to prevent this, we need to teach our kids how to come up to them and be comfortable and tell them that if someone has hurt you in a particular area, you can come up to them and tell them that.
And what is private?
This is yes, and that it's kept private, and that you know, it's just comfortable, and the kids know that they can come and talk to someone about it instead of just ignoring or not disclosing.
But it's also
this.
empowering the parents then as well, because some kids do go up to their parents if, you know,
And
they've been,
and
the parents just say, okay, let's remain quiet about it, because
Yeah,
I don't
they're
want
at a
the stigma
loss.
attached to the child
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, there's like, oh my gosh, don't,
Yeah.
don't
say
anything.
anything, yeah.
There's shame on the family. That's one of the worst things that you can
So I'm
say.
going to ask each of you,
to a
well,
child.
I put a question out there to each of you. Who taught you about sex? Or, even more simpler, body parts? How did you learn?
No
I mean, did you
one.
all use... So what
So
did
just-
you name
I
them?
think-
Did you use the terminology that everyone was
I
using in the
didn't.
playground? Or you just... You never spoke about
No,
it?
we never spoke about it.
And how do you think
amongst
that...
friends, you know, we
It's-
read romantic novels. You don't have that interest in having to do or read such things at the age of 4, obviously.
Yeah.
So
But
when
you're
as you
talking
grow,
about us
yeah.
growing up,
As
right?
you grow up.
How did
Yeah.
you become aware?
Exactly,
Oh,
but
right.
did you have friends who referred to their body parts differently? Like,
I think when I grew up, I wasn't taught the education at school, sex education school. In my teenage years, probably through friends and, you know,
Yeah.
researching on our own of it. And I think it would have been better if I did get to know from a professional or someone who knew. Then I would feel more confident when taking decisions or, you know, anything regarding this. You know, I'd feel like I know what to do.
There were some books lying around in the classroom, and I opened the book and I nearly had a heart attack because I thought, oh my gosh, what is he doing to her? And it was overwhelmingly shocking, and I was just shocked, and I closed it. I felt embarrassed. I felt, you know, I
didn't know.
but
I
if
didn't
you
know.
had had that education from a young age about, we're just talking about terminology, what to call your body parts, don't you think that would have been empowering?
I feel that would have helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because there
That
is
would
a
have helped.
movement where there's a social worker in Sweden who's pronounced a book, and for girls, because she says boys are allowed to have pet names for their body parts, but girls don't. So she felt left out. So she's created a book so that girls have their own name, and I don't necessarily think that's helpful at all,
No.
because what's the point?
It's funny because I have a daughter and I have nieces and stuff, and they'll just come up with their own sort of.
But do you
But
think
if-
that's good?
Yeah, but
If that's how they feel
Yeah.
comfortable. Maybe
yeah, but if
don't.
they do teach them these terminologies, you can teach them that you're supposed to use these words very respectfully. If someone is not aware, if your classmates are not aware of the word, do not just go up or call the opposite gender
By that word,
by that
like
word,
that.
you know,
Yeah.
to teach them and actually tell them, because their kids are innocent and they will understand if you teach
That's
them the
most
right
important.
way to, you know, go about it.
So I think it's a shame that we heavily rely on schools to do the parenting and the raising. I think, and especially because it's in the West that has this is being brought out. If it had been in the Middle East or in Asia, we would have been like horrified. Well, they're so backwards. But the fact that it's coming out in the West, and people who aren't religious or certain groups aren't even talking about it, I think it's another thing that schools have to do. And as you know, I think it's just too much pressure. The raising is happening in the schools, and I don't know what's going on at home, which it should be the other way around. But personally, ending your thoughts, all in favour of schools teaching young
Yes,
children? Yes?
yes.
3?
The
From
parents should be given the choice.
I feel the school should teach what they teach, and because they don't teach the moral side of it, it is the parents' responsibility then to also teach with the moral side of it.
In
Yeah.
agreement
I
with the
still-
moral side of it?
Yeah, and the spiritual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
And
gotta be
yourself?
appropriate.
Yes, I agree with Nisha.
Inshallah. So I think we're in agreement that it should be taught in schools. I think there should be some parenting lessons as well, by the way.
Yes.
We seem to think that once you have your child,
Once you
there's you know, a book of life and everything will come to you. But as I said with the FGM, I had no idea what it was until I
Yes.
was a teenager, and if someone had
I
said
still
what
didn't
that
know what it was. Just because I'm at a school now, I know it. But if I didn't work where I do, I don't think I would.
I think there should be classes for parents before these classes are given to the kids, because they need as much learning and how to cope with it, because they haven't experienced this in their own childhood. So it's something new for the parents as well. It's not easy because you haven't been through it, you do not understand what the kids are exposed to.
And as you said, the generational gap, I think especially in Muslim communities,
That's right.
sometimes we continue with the cultural baggage and think that we have to do the same.
Carry it on.
Yeah.
So I think it's something we should do, and I think it should be taught in madrasa as well, just to put it out there as well.
I agree, yes, it should be. I think it should be part of the curriculum.
That's a bit, I don't know.
No, because then that's where the spirituality
side comes
in.
It's body parts. We should stop being ashamed of our bodies and us created
of course,
this.
Islam has a very
There's
healthy
uses.
view.
Exactly.
And there were people in the
human
time of the
sexuality.
Prophet, they weren't shy to ask the Prophet. I'm sure Prophet was faced with, like some of our ulamas and alimas do now, faced with such questions.
Definitely true, ladies. Well, it's been wonderful having you. I think we're in the majority here, but of course there are people like our panelist Fahmida who share those views, and that's what's so good about this program. We all represent different views and different takes. Wonderful discussion, ladies. Now for our one-to-one discussion with Sister Masuma Jafar. And now on to my favourite segment, my one-to-one discussion with Sister Masuma Jafar. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, thank you.
Good, good. I wanted to ask you a really pressing question. What are your thoughts on sex education being taught in school, especially with children as young as 4 or 5? What is the Islamic perspective on teaching things such as that?
There is actually no Islamic perspective given as such in that, what age it should be taught at. I think it's sensitive to the needs of the children, and obviously the parents would know best when is the right time to teach their children. The problem is most parents would shy away from it rather than actually talk about it.
Well, why do you think that is? Do you think it's an Islamic thing? Do we sometimes get overly go overboard with the concept of modesty and being appropriate, or do you think it's
I don't
something
think
else?
it is to do with an Islamic perspective, because if a mother is talking to her daughter about it, there's no modest issue as such there. I think it's more cultural than Islamic.
Okay, but if it is cultural, why haven't we broken down those barriers yet? I mean, with every culture, I think sometimes it's left and it's presumed that, before someone gets married, they'll find out when they get married. And, it might be a bit awkward then and maybe traumatic for some people. So why isn't there a push to, Islam covers every aspect of life. Isn't there a push to, reclaim our power, and our bodies are not something to be ashamed of?
For sure. I think there is. I think as we're sort of realizing that, if we do not talk about it with our children, it is something that they will find out either from schools, from their peers, or from the internet. And, it would make sense for parents actually to sit down with their children and talk about it and give them the Islamic perspective. I think that is the duty of the parent, to actually make sure that the child knows what is allowed and what is not allowed from an Islamic perspective.
And do you think we do a good job of that in our madrasas and is that really covered? I'm just trying to think of syllabuses that I've looked at.
I think
it's not really covered
no.
until higher education.
Yeah, I think usually before the child becomes baligh, there are certain things that are covered so that the child knows, and realizes that they become baligh and things like that. But then I think the rest is probably covered when they're quite a lot older. By then, they probably know most everything because they've talked about it.
I just wanted to pick your brain. A question just came to me. In regards to teaching sex education, correct terminology for body parts, do you feel that Islamically this should be taught by, so boys being taught by boys, girls being taught by girls, or do you think it matters at a certain age as to who imparts the education?
I think it would be better for a male teacher to talk to the boys and for a female teacher to talk to the girls if it was going to be taught in schools. And also I think we've got to realise that the schools will teach what is in the curriculum, but not the moral aspect, not the Islamic aspect. And I think it is the duty of the parents to find out exactly what's being taught in the schools and then explain to the children, okay, you've learnt these facts, but they're not necessarily what we believe in or what Islam says, and give that Islamic and moral perspective.
And why do you think there should be a separation? Many schools do, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
I just think it's awkward when you're learning things for the first time to sort of be around the opposite sex as for the children themselves. And if they have any questions, then the ones who are a little bit more shy wouldn't actually ask those questions in front of, they would find it difficult enough asking in front of the same sex, let alone in front of the opposite sex.
What about the madrasa situation? Because, for example, I know of a person who is hard of hearing, and she had a son, and he was being taught in madrasa by her, actually. And she was the one who, she felt very embarrassed that she had to have these discussions with her son. And I was like, why are you embarrassed? It's something natural. But he was like, can you imagine your mom telling you these things? Like, well, isn't it your job? But what do you think?
I honestly, I think how it depends on which culture you come from and how embedded that culture is within you. I mean, I chose as a mother to ensure that I was the one who would give, the information to my children, because I wanted them to know it from the Islamic perspective, and I wanted, I wanted to be the one that taught them and explained everything and explained why Islam says what it says.
Now, when we speak about the spiritual aspect of it can be so broad, and for our viewers who are tuned in and maybe don't know how to approach the subject, how would you, for a 4 or 5-year-old, would you start with naming the body parts, or how would you introduce spirituality into it, other than from a hijab perspective, as in, we need to cover ourselves, etc. How would you?
I honestly think it depends on the level of understanding of the child. I handled it on a one-to-one with each one of my children at a different level, depending on their understanding and the questions that they had. But I think the child, needs to know that they have been created by God, and God has chosen to create male and female, and we are different. We differ in the way we look. We differ in the way, the roles that we will play to a certain extent, because, usually, and this is very, very general, women are more emotional, more nurturing than men, and just things like that. So I think at the age of 4 and 5, I would just maybe point out that there is difference in males and females, and God has created them differently, but the potential to get close to Allah has been given to both.
Very important.
Yeah.
And so, going by what you said, you would start at a young age, as soon as they recognise those?
Yes, and I think, but very, very basic, and then just take it from what the child is asking, the questions that the child is asking. I truly believe that if a child asks a question, I would not try to avoid the answer. I would answer according to the age of the child, because I feel when you try to avoid answering the question, the child will find the answer from somewhere else.
So you didn't feel that it's kind of taking away the child's innocence by having these discussions?
No, because I feel that they live in a society where they're exposed to so much anyway. I don't think I'm taking away the innocence by explaining it to them. I'm just explaining the questions that are, coming into their mind because of what they're exposed to.
And do you feel that it's a good thing that the schools are taking on this initiative, or do you feel a little bit sad that we've become so, I don't know what's the word, so embarrassed, so, I don't know, so I want to kind of say not being responsible, that somebody else has to do it for us? I mean,
yes and no. I mean, and I think that children need to know, but I don't think. I mean, I didn't want my children to learn it from school. I think the new initiative that they've taken out about relationship awareness is brilliant, because I think each child should know what relationships are, and so that if there is any chance of abuse, then they're aware of that.
Even emotional abuse
Yes.
as well, which is something I think we should do as a community too, because like we've discussed previously, we don't have a lot of or maybe there are in some centres, but we don't have any like courses in schools when we're like teenagers to prepare us to spot manipulators, etc., and just understand our feelings and differentiate between what is lust and what is really love. So I think schools are, you know, ahead of us in that sense. If you had a message for parents, what would it be about taking control of the spiritual aspect and teaching their children the spiritual side of, say, you know, relationship awareness, body awareness, etc.? What advice would you give them? Because sometimes you feel a bit silly when you go into school and you're saying, well, okay, I'm happy for my child to be in this class, but I want to give another dimension. You don't want to come across like fanatical, especially in this day and age. Or
I think, I mean, rather than, I would actually tell the school that I want my child to learn the moral aspects of relationships, and that's not taught in the schools. And I don't think anyone would sort of think you're fanatic if you want to teach a child morality. So rather than sitting there saying, I want to teach the Islamic perspective, I would go from the moral aspect, because Islam is all about morality anyway.
And how would you feel, what would you say to parents who are considering removing their children from those classes? Do you think it's...
I think it's their right. I would not do it as a knee-jerk reaction. I would first find out exactly what is being taught in the school, and whether I wanted my child to know what was being taught in the school, and whether I could counteract some of the things that I didn't agree with from an Islamic perspective, and also be aware that, one, if you pull your child out of the school, he may be made fun of, bullying and so forth. Secondly, he's probably going to get the information, but he'll get it from his peers, which will probably be not as correct as what the teacher's telling him.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, as you've travelled to Islamic countries, what do you feel their feeling on subjects like this is? Are they aware of what happens over here in terms of what happens in our schools and the issues that we face? Do our managers know what's going on over here? I mean, are they clued up, or are we is it just a cultural thing that's coming through over here that, you know, just pretend nothing's happening and keep calm and carry on?
I think the problem we have is when we look at the marja, we see him as a very old man sitting in his house and not leaving his house and just studying and studying and not actually having lived life. What we're not aware of is that he has representatives all over the world who are feeding back to him what's happening in that part of the world. So he's very aware of what's happening in the West. For us to think...
But when you say that, are they in religious communities that may be very conservative, or are they living life like everybody else and having the same issues as everybody else?
He doesn't just have one representative. He has quite a few in different places. Obviously, they would be religious, but that usually they would hold some sort of role within a community, so they would be aware of the problems of that community. They would, people would come to them for solutions and ask, with their problems and so forth. So they're not, again, living in sort of their own bubble. If anything, they're probably exposed to more than me and you are. I'm
so relieved to hear that. I really enjoyed this segment. I hope you have too, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.